given knowledge through visions, through dreams. Part of the mysteriousness of life is, why is one child born a great hunter and another one couldn't find a deer in a zoo?
You anontuan maonak as wit when wampanoag tuank, ni anautak wampanoag utnontuank no. Aqui wapsik matanakisantam wampanai sipuamat, whipping the catantam canutamana at wachta tonquak. Wampanoag ayuak wampani musa chursit, at ampamiet, at napet, kachet musipiet. Monatas katamukish wani wampanoag tuachik. Quit Wampanoag Chapanoak, you nompi kikakjaunat, ni homonchi with non tuankano. Jesse Little Delaware, katnachton tain and you at MIT, kak you kakutumukao, non tuang at Ankatagni Wampanoag. Kusi nisui a katnachton tain and yimak, wasakiach Jason Baird, kak Woody Vanderhoop. Jesse kak Jason Watonua, May Alice, nisui utani tui non tuankano. Chakwa kontuang, ka wampanoag tuang. Uchichuankana, weepy wampanoag tuanamonkwa. Okay, so I want to thank all of you for bringing me here, but I should tell you that there are many respects in which you would be better off if the person that was here is the person that you just saw in some of my slides, Jessie Little Baird, who is really at the heart of what I'm going to describe to you today. And the easiest way that I can think of to give you some sense of what she would say if she were here is to show you a little clip from this movie that some of you have heard about, and which, if I can find the right part of this menu, I will show to you. What are we doing? Oh, this is what we're doing. This is a movie called As Natanyan, which means We Still Live Here. It's a movie that was made about the attempt that's currently ongoing to revive the Wampanoag language. So I just want to show you a little clip from it. This is partly about how Jessie was inspired to get started doing this work. There's a little bit in here about sort of people's feelings about the work, people in the community and others. And I'll show you a little clip from a beginner's class. And then what I thought I would do next is tell you a little bit about how exactly we're going about doing what we're doing, which is to attempt to revive as a spoken language a language which is currently known only from documents and which has had no speakers for over a century. So here's a clip. Everybody hear that okay?
I started having these dreams some years ago, and I was seeing all these people that really looked familiar, but I didn't know them. And they looked familiar because they looked like everybody else around home. They were talking to me, and I didn't understand what they were saying. I'd never heard the language before, but it sounded familiar, but I just thought maybe I was getting a little nutty. Sometime after that, I was traveling down this road, and I saw that sign for Sippawisset, and I don't know why, but the light just went on, and I thought, oh, you know, I wonder if that's Wampanoag language I'm hearing. I wonder what that is, and it just never dawned on me that that's what I was hearing until I saw that one sign. Looking at that word and saying that word in my mind, I thought, well, I don't know anything about our language. What was it like? You know, nothing about it.
My brother, when he died, he was...
Let's get that lady.
I think all
Sorry,
my
lady.
life I've been under the impression that our language was dead. A lot of the reflection in this world that I receive is that the Wampanoag people don't exist.
I don't think we know with any certainty when the last fluent speaker of Wampanoag died, but it's probably more than a century.
I think a lot of things happened. A lot of death happened. I think people being displaced happened. I think war happened. And I think Christianity happened.
language of extermination and destruction. It's one of the two original sins of the country right here. The Wampanoag were, after all, the people who lived here at the time that the Pilgrims landed.
I think there's such a desire in our own people to wish that colonization never happened. We really want to take responsibility for everything in a way. We want to take responsibility for the fact that we don't speak our language. We want to take responsibility for the fact that, you know, we lost the war in a way. You know, well, why couldn't we have done better? Why couldn't we have pushed the English out and kept our land and kept our language? It's, you know, horrible when you think about it. Of course we lost our language.
And it must have been a great sadness for the last few people who could actually speak to know that the majority of the people weren't understanding or couldn't understand what was being said to them.
Okay, so I'm going to skip again.
My spirit.
This is a bit of an intro class.
I enjoy it very much. I find the language difficult, challenging, because the concepts seem simple, but the speech is very complicated.
In the beginning, when we first started meeting, we discovered that we really needed a trained individual. And at the time, I was working in human services. I had absolutely no training in linguistics. I left and got married at 18. I had my first child before I was 19. Was taking college courses for a while and just could not finish. And then we decided, well, we have to have an Indian person. So let's see, who are we going to get that's American Indian that'll leave their community, drop their language work, and come here and live with us for the rest of their lives? Oh, and we don't have any money, by the way. Well, we showed up in Acuna one particular month, and there was this elder white man standing there. This is our guest linguist from MIT. His name's Ken Hale. And I'm sitting here listening to this white man tell us how maybe he could help us bring our language home. And I thought, wow, isn't this ironic? And was really, really, that bothered me to my core, that the question wouldn't be, do we do it ourselves? You know, that we would have to depend on some white person to do this work. And so I was really nasty to him. He said something about a word in Wampanoag, and he put an L where there should have been an N. And I made a point of jabbing at him about that and saying, well, you don't know what you're talking about. We don't even have an L language. I was really ill-behaved at that meeting. So then the next option was to take the responsibility ourselves and get the training ourselves and do the work ourselves. Some months later, an application for a research fellowship at MIT was given to me at a tribal meeting. I opened it up and it said that you could have a research fellowship there for a year. And you could research anything you wanted for a year. So I thought, oh, I wonder if that school has linguistics. And I looked and lo and behold, it's one of the premier linguistic institutes in the world. I went up for an interview, and the first question I got was, what's your biggest fear at attending MIT? And I said to this one woman, honestly, I don't know my way around Boston. I come from a small Indian community, and once we get past Plymouth, it's all Boston to us. It's all Boston. It's off Cape. It's all just buildings and people and noises. Beyond that, I'm not afraid of anything yet.
knowing Jessie all her life, I never would have known.
Wonderful, hopeful thing.
Oh, sorry. Here, we'll stop right there. Okay, so that was just to give you an idea of how this whole thing got started. Jessie, after attending Ken Hale's talk, discovered that she had this opportunity to go to MIT to study linguistics and to work on her language. So she decided to go to MIT. She looked in the course catalog to see who she would be working with, and looking down the name of Ken Hale, and discovered, there's a nice bit in this film which I recommend to you if you would like to watch it. It's a wonderful movie in a lot of ways. She went to his office fully prepared to grovel, and he apparently, as she walked in, he said, "It's you. I remember you. Where have you been? I've been waiting for you." And they got to work immediately. Ken Hale was a wonderful, wonderful, sweet man. He died, the anniversary of his death was yesterday in 2001. I got started working on this project when I joined the faculty in 1999, so I was working with Ken and with Jessie. And we got started working through these documents. So what I want to do tonight is to show you a little bit of the nature of the documents that we're working with and the kind of work that we're doing with them. And then I will switch back to this movie and show you a few of the results of all that. So the sources first. Our big source, our largest source of information, is a translation of the Bible. It's the first Bible that was published in this hemisphere in any language. It was a Wampanoag Bible. It was published here in Boston. It's such a wonderful Bible that it causes equipment to fail just all around it. It's really translation by John Eliot in 1663, and then there was a second edition in 1685. We've been working with the 1685 edition partly because there are more of them and partly because he had clearly corrected some mistakes in the intervening 22 years. The Bible is a wonderful document in lots of ways. It's got lots of vocabulary in it, lots of areas where large swaths of vocabulary are missing, so there's all kinds of things that we're not going to be able to recover just from looking at the Bible. Native names for animals and plants, for example, are largely missing, although they did some substitutions. So the vipers in the Bible were all rattlesnakes in the Wampanoag edition, and the lions are all mountain lions. So they did some of those kinds of things that give us a hint of what was going on. They also took the opportunity to do a little bit of proselytizing. This is a verse from Exodus 22:18, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," that is, do not allow witches to live. The word for witch is powwow. Powwow is one of the Wampanoag words that we have borrowed into English as powwow. In Wampanoag it referred to a person. It was a religious practitioner, someone who was in charge of religious ceremony. The word is used in the Bible, but it's only used in this kind of context. So powwows are always witches, wizards, people in alliance with the devil. Jesus Christ is not a powwow. So it's pretty clear from the text how we were supposed to think about powwows when we're reading this. It literally means a person who dreams. There are also some places where, so we know that the Bible was created as part of a collaboration between John Eliot, who was a native speaker of English. To his credit, when he came here, he decided that what he needed to do was to learn to speak Wampanoag, and did a lot of traveling in Wampanoag communities and preaching in the Wampanoag communities where he was. And then working with Wampanoag, who he had converted to Christianity, to develop materials, educational materials, for other Wampanoag to learn about Christianity. Whatever you think about his goal of spreading Christianity among the Wampanoag, he certainly went about it in the most intelligent and humane way. So we know that the Bible was created via collaboration between Eliot and some native speakers of Wampanoag. It's often unclear who is responsible for various kinds of things. There are places where there are mistakes which we suspect are the result of Wampanoag speakers who didn't quite understand what they were being asked to translate, rather than Eliot not quite understanding what the Bible said. This is a verse from Job which starts, "How forcible are right words?" That is, this is part of the discussion between Job and the people who are trying to comfort him, if you know the book of Job. These friends who are coming by basically to tell him that he must deserve all of these terrible things, otherwise God wouldn't be inflicting them on him. At one point Job says, "How forcible are right words?" That is, what a wonderful argument that is. The translation of that into Wampanoag, so in English that sentence begins with the word how, but it's not a question. You know, so how is often a question, but this is kind of an exclamation. The Wampanoag translation is a question. So in the Wampanoag version, Job is asking his friend, how good an argument is that exactly? So there are some places where probably Eliot did not make this mistake. This is probably a Wampanoag person. There are some other texts, many of them religious, that were translated by Eliot together with other people. This is a translation of the Lord's Prayer and a little catechisms and questions and answers about the nature of Christianity. He also had did a logic textbook in Wampanoag. So Eliot apparently felt that it was important for Wampanoag that he had converted to Christianity, who he had then sort of ordained as ministers, to be able to construct logical arguments so that he could convince other Wampanoag of the wonderful properties of Christianity. So we have this logic textbook that was written in Wampanoag, which means that we have the Wampanoag word for syllogism, for example, just in case we ever need it. It's right there. It literally means a small speech, I assume, because the point of a syllogism is that it condenses something that would otherwise be a long argument into its bare bones, into its essentials. And then we have a bunch of what are called the native writings. These are documents that were written by native speakers of Wampanoag. Many of them are legal documents of various kinds. Once the Wampanoag discovered that white people did not honor oral contracts, which was their standard way of making various legal deals, they began writing down deeds and wills, and this is a bill of sale. Later, they discovered that white people did not honor written contracts either, but you know, that was later. So there are all these documents that were written by native speakers. Some of them are fairly heartbreaking. So here's one that is a petition from the Wampanoag of Mashpee to the government of Boston. It says, "Truly we think it is this, we poor Indians soon shall not have any place to reside." And they were wrong about that. They still live in Mashpee, but they were right to be concerned. Okay, so we have all these documents, and we've been going through them, developing a dictionary and various kinds of educational materials, textbooks, books for children, all kinds of things that are useful for people who want to learn the language. There are obviously a lot of challenges that we confront when we're trying to figure out how to take the information that's in these written documents and convert that into a living spoken language. I just want to talk about a couple of them, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about whatever other ones you guys are curious about later on. So one obvious question is, how do we know how to pronounce this language? There are no recordings of anyone speaking it. So we're making our best estimate of how it was pronounced. And we have the advantage of one of the big discoveries of linguistics, which is this. When you have languages that are closely related, languages like English and German, let's say, it's not hard to compile lists like this list of words that mean more or less the same thing and sound kind of similar. So, you know, the English word for dance, the German word for that is Tanz. Okay, that's not so hard. It's almost dance with the German accent. But what linguistics has discovered, actually quite a long time ago, is that you can go further than this. It's always the case when you have a pair of related languages, if they're truly related. It's not just that you can get these lists of words that look kind of similar, but that there are rules, like where you have a D in English, you have a T in German, that are more or less reliable. It goes beyond just these languages look kind of similar. There are these rules. Sometimes they're more simple or more complicated than the one I just put up here. So, you know, sometimes there are more than one sound in one language that correspond to one sound in another language. But there's this very general pattern. And in fact, this is how you demonstrate that languages are related to each other. So when you read in popular science journals about people making exciting discoveries about languages being related to each other that weren't previously thought to be, the people who are making those discoveries are usually ignoring this convention of actually discovering regular sound correspondences. We can do something similar for Wampanoag. So Wampanoag, although it hasn't been spoken for over a century, it's a member of the large and very well documented Algonquian language family. There are many Algonquian languages, and some of them are still spoken. None of them are all that healthy. The healthiest is Ojibwe, which is not all that closely related to Wampanoag, though they're related. We do a lot of comparison between Wampanoag and Delaware, which has speakers, not very many, some elderly speakers. Delaware is an Algonquian language, gets its name from the fact that it's spoken in Ontario, but used to be spoken in Delaware, I guess, which is, and in New Jersey. If we look at Delaware and we compare these Delaware words to Wampanoag equivalents that we find in our documents, here's one regular sound correspondence that we find. Whenever we see a long ah in Delaware, which we're writing with 2 A's, that's the standard way to write it, we find these are the spellings in our documents of these related words. We find some vowel that looks like it must have been nasal, right? So you look at, let's take this one, wingatan, which is to like, the verb to like. The vowel that's in the middle of that in Wampanoag is being spelled O-N, right? And so we figure, right, that's a nasal vowel. That's why it's being spelled with the letters O-N. And when you have a nasal vowel before a T in English, then yeah, that's how it's going to be spelled. So we spell that in the modern orthography. We spell these languages this way, and we use this symbol to symbolize that nasal vowel. These are examples in which just looking at the Wampanoag texts, we might guess that there's a nasal vowel in there because there are these M's and N's, these sort of sounds that make it look like we're trying to spell a nasal vowel. Okay, so very generally when you have a Delaware long ah, you have a Wampanoag And again, very generally when you have a Delaware short ah, you have a Wampanoag vowel that's spelled with the letters O or A. So I'm using these brackets to indicate the way they're spelled in the documents, and these are our reconstructions of how these words were pronounced. We're writing them in a modern orthography. So we have these general sound rules that say wherever Delaware had a long ah, Wampanoag had an ah, and wherever Delaware had a short ah, Wampanoag had an ah. And by making observations like that, we're able to make use of Delaware in places where it's not clear what's being spelled. So here's the word for too much. As you can see, it's spelled a bunch of different ways in the documents. These are documents from the 1600s, 1700s. This is a time when even in English it was the mark of a gentleman not to spell a word the same way twice, and in Wampanoag the spelling, as you might imagine, is all over the place. So here are a bunch of spellings of this word, and given what we know about the vowel inventory of Wampanoag, the set of vowels that we have, you might wonder whether this is the the nasal vowel, or the the non-nasal vowel. Because the letter that comes right after it is an M, just looking at these spellings you can't tell because English doesn't have a way of indicating, oh, that vowel is a nasal vowel. So this is the kind of case in which we can look at Delaware and see that the Delaware word for too much is wasami with a long ah, thanks to our general sound correspondence that allows us to say, oh, well, then that must have been a long, that must have been a nasal, because that's the Wampanoag vowel that correlates with that Delaware vowel. So even in places like this where our documents don't tell us by themselves what vowel that was, by comparing Wampanoag with other languages that are spoken into the present day, we're able to sort of come to conclusions about questions like this. So there are places like this where we're doing a lot of etymological work to find corresponding words in related languages. Another big area of study is the study of how Wampanoag makes words. Wampanoag is what linguists call a polysynthetic language, which means that it gets into making words that are really, really long. So if you know anything about German, you know that the Germans are proud of having words that are too long. The Wampanoag laugh at German words. Their words are way the heck too long. This is the beginning, or this is part of a letter from a man who was let's see, he was white, he was Caucasian, his name was Experience Mayhew, because they knew how to name people in those days. He grew up the child of colonists, but by his own account, he was bilingual in English and Wampanoag, and he did a great deal of translation of documents into Wampanoag. He wrote a letter to someone who had apparently asked him to come up with the longest word in Wampanoag that he could. And he thought about it and gave a couple of examples. His favorite one is this one down here at the bottom, which I'll write for you again in orthography. This is our very skillful mirror makers, which I urge you not to try to pronounce without lots of practice. The Wampanoag have actually started to have a contest, an annual contest, to come up with words that are longer than this. Those really advanced students sit down and try to come up with them. So this is a word that has many parts, and so part of our goal is to try to figure out these rules for combining parts into words. That's a list of the parts, so it's our clear skill, and now we have device for looking at one's reflection. So look at reflection device, and then maker, and then some other suffixes at the end. By studying the way in which words are made up out of parts of words, there are a couple of points to that. One is to, well, help us to figure out the vocabulary that we're encountering in the documents that we have, because we do find words like this, not just when Experience Mayhew is trying to make them up. But also because it gives us an opportunity to figure out how to make words for modern things in Wampanoag, things that came into existence after contact or after Wampanoag ceased to be spoken. Because Wampanoag is so good at making up new words, we have a chance to modernize the vocabulary. It's in an excellent position to do that. And one way that we know that is that in the documents that we have, there are words, long words like these, which are clearly words for things that the Wampanoag wouldn't have had prior to contact. So I can give you a couple of examples. Here are a couple of words. I haven't told you what they mean. I've just broken them down into their parts. The first one has parts, the result of which mean cloth, thing that you put your head on top of. Anyone want to guess what that is? Pillow? It's a pillow, yes. That's the word for a pillow. And the second one is the one who habitually carries people on his back.
A horse.
That's a horse, exactly. So these are two things that the Wampanoag didn't have prior to contact, but after contact they made them up, right, at a time when the language was still vigorous. So now that we are attempting to revigorate the language, well, we're trying to figure out what tricks they were using to do this. That's one of our goals. Fortunately, we have these great big texts that give us lots of examples of them doing this kind of work. Another issue having to do with how words are formed. So first, let me tell you some things that some of you may already know. Linguists say that verbs in many languages agree with the subject, by which we mean that the verb takes a slightly different form depending on what the subject is. So in English, for example, you say I read, but you say she reads. You add an S to the verb. That changes the verb a little bit to tell you that the subject is he or she and not I or you or any of a number of other things. And if you've ever studied languages like Spanish or Latin or French or Russian or a bunch of other languages, you've spent some time chanting these little paradigms to yourself, like trying to remember which verb forms go in which places. In Wampanoag, the verb agrees with both the subject and the object. That is, there's stuff on the verb that tells you about the subject and about the object. And actually, for ditransitive verbs, I gave it to him, there's agreement with the subject and the object and the indirect object. There's agreement with all three things. Figuring this out has been a challenge. Fortunately, it's on a system which is well attested in the Algonquian languages, and we're able to take advantage of a lot of previous scholarship. If you were to ask a linguist to invent a language that had agreement with both the subject and the object, the linguist might say, oh, I don't know, maybe it has a prefix for the subject and then a suffix for the object or something like that. This is not what Wampanoag does. Here are a couple of Wampanoag verbs. They mean I see them and they see me. And as you can see, the verbs are almost identical. They have 4 parts, and they only differ in one of the suffixes. So what happens with both of these verbs is there's a verb stem, now, that means to see, and there's a prefix that says, in effect, somewhere in this sentence there is a reference to the speaker, an I or a me, but I'm not going to tell you yet whether it's the subject or the object. And at the end, there's a suffix that says somewhere in this sentence there is a third person plural animate, a they or a them, but I'm not going to tell you yet whether it's the subject or the object. And then there are these suffixes, on, ak, that say, in effect, remember the prefix? That was the subject. Why they do this is one thing that I would like to know, but they do. And fortunately for us, again, this is a very common Algonquian pattern, and so we're able to take advantage of observations people have made about this system. And believe me, I'm only showing you a tiny corner of it. It's a huge and very complex system. So one other tiny corner I can show you. In Wampanoag and in most Algonquian languages, there are 2 sets of verbs. So there are 2 ways, in effect, to say I see them. You can say the verb I showed you before, knock. But there's this other form of the verb, what's called the conjunct. So you can also say knock. That also means I see them. It can also mean I see him or her. And there are rules about when you use the independent and when you use the conjunct. When I first started working on this, Ken Hale, the professor that Jesse was working with when I arrived, said, hey, Norvin, why don't you go through the documents and figure out the independent and the conjunct? And it took me, I think, 5 years to figure out the independent and the conjunct. Ken died before I figured out the independent and the conjunct. It was really one of the many reasons that I'm unhappy that he died. So the conjunct, for example, is used in all embedded questions. It's used in questions about who unless who is the subject and a third person pronoun is the object, or on a Tuesday in a month beginning with an M. It's an extremely complex setup. Here's some more. Yeah, and unless who is the subject, a non-third person pronoun is the object, and the question is rhetorical. So we have the advantage, again, of lots of textual material that we can go through and try to find out all of these nooks and crannies of the grammar. Finding the nooks and crannies is now one of our goals.
So do you think that was how they figured it out, because they just had a lot of time on their hands?
See, I mean, I think traditional life, I'm not sure how much time they actually had on their hands, right? It would be fairly tricky, but yeah, no, you wonder. You wonder. One other sort of thing of this kind that we've sort of recently gotten into. So part of this work, because we have all of this complicated stuff to go through, and because we still have not fully gone through all of the documents to create, put them all in dictionaries, the Wampanoag knew at the beginning that this might happen, and it has continued to happen as we've gone along. Every so often we have to announce that we made a mistake, right? So we go and we are giving our best guess right along, but every so often Jesse and I realize going through the documents, oh no, actually we had it wrong all along. So I'm going to tell you about one such time. There are two ways to ask, where did you come from? And so there they are up there on the screen. And as you can see, they have different words for where. And they also have slightly different verbs. So the second verb, the verb in the second example, has a suffix that the first one doesn't have. And because the second one has this fancy verb form, so I told you about the independent, and I told you about the conjunct, and I have not told you about the subordinative, and don't worry, I'm not going to, but it's yet another complicated set of verbs that you need to learn if you want to learn to speak this language properly. So when we first realized that there were these two ways to ask where questions, we thought, well, we know which of these we're going with. We're going to go with the first one, because the first one, uses a comparatively simple verb form that we're familiar with in other places. That's the one you'd use to say, you came from Atlanta or whatever. We thought that even though the second one, the one with the more complicated verb, is much more common in texts. That should have been a tip-off. We should have said to ourselves, okay, we should really go ahead and learn how to do the subordinative. But we didn't. We stuck with the first one, which was a mistake. It turns out that the Tana, this word for where that's up at the top, has a special meaning. It means where, and I have no idea at all how you're going to answer this question. It took us quite a while. This is one of the more recent things that we have figured out. So Tana, places where you use Tana in the documents include talking to people you've just met. So, here's a verse from Joshua. Joshua meets the Hivites for the first time, and says, who are you and where do you come from? Okay, he's just meeting them, has no idea where they're from. He's just asking, where are you from? It's also used in the kinds of contexts where in English we'd say, where on earth, or where the hell, or whatever, right? So, expressing annoyance. So this is an example. Saul, in the book of Samuel, from 1 Samuel, Saul and his servant are sent to look for Saul's father's donkeys. They do not find the donkeys, and moreover, they spend the night visiting a holy man that they come across. And when they come back, this is what Saul's uncle says to them. So he's not just saying, where have you been? He's saying, where have you been? Right? Something along those lines. It's more emphatic. It's also used in rhetorical questions. So here's an example from Psalms. My foes taunt me, saying to me all day long, where is your God? My foes are not expecting an address, right? My foes are saying, your God does not exist, right? There is no, that's the point of the question. So again, in all of these examples, the point of the question is to express not only the question, but the fact that the speaker doesn't know what answer you could possibly give. Zechariah, if you've read the book, I can recommend the book of Zechariah to you if you are not familiar with the book of Zechariah. It is the most hallucinatory book of the Bible, possibly tying with Revelations. It is a weird, weird book of the Bible. Zechariah experiences a vision in which he sees all kinds of odd things, including a scroll flying through the air. And in this verse, he's just seen a man who is carrying a measuring line, and he asks the man where he's going. The answer is he's going to Jerusalem. He's going to measure it with the measuring line. And he asks, where are you going? Point being, Zechariah has no idea what's going on at any point in this. He has an angel standing next to him explaining everything to him. And this is one of his questions. Christ, again, confessing that you have no idea what the answer is, Christ says, I am going to the one who sent me, and his disciples will look for me, but you will not find me. His disciples, if you're familiar with the Gospels at all, the disciples are often kind of baffled by Christ. Christ says things, and the disciples are not real clear what's going on. They say to each other, where is he going to go? Or to imply that the person you're talking to doesn't know the answer, and therefore you don't know how they could possibly answer the question. So Christ at one point is being quizzed by temple elders, and he tells them, I'll answer your questions if you'll answer this one. Where did the baptism of John come from God or from men? And he knows that the temple elders can't safely answer this question. They say to each other, well, if we say from God, then we have to explain why we have been opposing John all this time. And if we say from men, then John's followers will beat us up. So we don't know what to say. And Christ knows that that's what they're going to do. That's why he asks the question. So again, point of the question is, you're not going to be able to answer this one. So those are some of the kinds of things that we've been doing with the texts. I just want to show you one more clip from here, which shows one of the results of this work. One of the things that we've been doing is, so the Wampanoag have been conducting classes on all levels. Let's see, can I skip some things? Will you let me do that? Why not? Please? Yeah, there we go. The Wampanoag have been conducting classes on a variety of levels, and one of the things that they do every year is an immersion camp. So this is a bit in which is a camp at which only Wampanoag is spoken. Here's a clip from that.
It started with Mashpee, herring pond, and then a song. And it was just going on and spreading out.
When I speak Wampanoag, how much I love this language. I love the sound. I love the way that the words combine in meaning. I love being able to understand a different way of seeing the world through the words. I feel so much more connected to the person that I'm talking to, knowing that it's almost like a little secret club, like we're talking Wampanoag, and how excellent is that?
And I'm just like, oh, thank God. Oh, thank God. That we got people that are doing this again. So it's great. It just overwhelms me.
Weepy, Nakawin, Latukin, Kupas.
The people who first attended classes are now able to teach others at least some of the beginning stuff.
Mata Yuan, Kuipasan, Wanimatompan, Wanikisa. Hakis?
On the continuum of proficiency in speakers, we're just not there yet.
Waninakan.
I mean, we've got to get people to be able to have casual conversation first, without a break, without having to stop and think about every word, and we just don't have that yet.
Jesse, son, Kadaton, Napana.
Homage.
Jesse, son, Kadaton, Washington,
The language is not just words. I mean, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. It's all embodied in the language. So it's really the revival of a culture and a way of life.
I'm so happy that we have the ability to do something about the past with the language. It's an excellent way to make lemonade out of lemons. We were given lots of lemons as a result of our history. Now we have to find a way to find happiness in our life and in our culture. And so that's what the language does for me. It brings me a lot of happiness being with my people. I think that that pleases the Creator.
We are given knowledge through visions, through dreams. Part of the mysteriousness of life is, why is one child born a great hunter and another one couldn't find a deer in a zoo? Some of the elements of being a leader are greater than the person themselves. In our Indian ways, leaders don't tout themselves. They don't stand in the front of the line to be chosen. They rise up from the ranks.
Part of our prophecy says during the 7th generation, language will come home. And then we have May, our speaker, our native speaker. If she's the first, there necessarily has to be a second, and a third, and a fourth. Language can come home again.
It's really hard to project 10 years down the road for our language. We've done great things, but there's a lot more work ahead of us, I think, than what's behind us.
So that little exchange at the end is May saying, "I'm a child," and her mom asks her, "How about me? Am I a child?" And she says, "No." Am I a woman? Yes, sure. This is, I'm sorry, I'm not used to going back and forth. I'm from MIT. You'd think I would be good at multimedia, but this is, let's see, full screen. There we go. So what's next? Well, you just heard some people talk a little bit about what's next. Things that are going on right now, there are these yearly immersion camps at which only Wampanoag is spoken. This year there were 65 people at the immersion camp. The immersion camps, only Wampanoag is spoken, and the way that they guarantee that is that you're given a little string of beads at the beginning, of wampum, plastic beads. And, if you hear someone speaking English, you're entitled to demand wampum from them. At the end, they have an auction in which you can buy things with your wampum. So people get very zealous about this. I was at an immersion camp, and I was caught speaking with my wife, who is Japanese, in Japanese, and they were like, "Wampum, wampum." And we're like, "Wait, it's not English." I was like, "No, it's not Wampanoag. That's the important thing." They were right, so we had to give up a lot of wampum. There are also classes for adults and kids on all levels. There are currently 13 people certified to teach the language, including a core of about 5 or 6 people who meet with Jesse weekly and speak only in Wampanoag all day, regularly, every week. Classes are mostly on the Cape. There are also classes in Boston. And there are plans for a charter school to open in August 2015, in which the language of instruction will be Wampanoag. So that's the next step. And if you would like to learn more about this, this is the website of the project, the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project. So you can go there to find other information and find people to contact, or you can ask me. I'm glad to try to answer any questions you might have. And thanks for listening. Yes. Thank you.